There are plenty of reasons that an Alaska cruise should be on your top bucket list, whether that's the rugged glaciers, huge mountains, or scenic landscapes. There are ample opportunities to see some incredible views of the last frontier, and you'll want to explore as much as possible. And a cruise to Alaska is a really popular idea, and more people want to try it out for themselves. But where do you start? I'm going to break down what you need to know on how to choose the right Alaska cruise itinerary up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and a cruise to Alaska is one of the most popular types of cruises out there, but which itinerary should you pick? If you've never cruised to Alaska before, you may find the decision on which ship, embarkation port, and itinerary a pretty tough decision because there's a lot of considerations out there when you're choosing an Alaska cruise. But ultimately, the decision may come down to budget, convenience, and even time for that matter. And today I wanted to break down what an Alaska cruise is all about and how to pick one. Because if you're saying to yourself, I want to go to Alaska, that's great, but there's so many great choices to consider. In fact, depending on the year you're looking at, Royal Caribbean offers 4 different ships that go to Alaska on a multitude of itineraries from different ports. They're different prices. Does the ship matter? How much does the itinerary matter? What about the ports you're visiting? What should you be looking for? And before you book a cruise to Alaska, I'm going to share what you need to know about picking the perfect Alaska cruise for your family. Now, there's a lot of places you can start, but I think it makes the most sense to start with the embarkation port. Royal Caribbean offers cruises from 2 ports, really, Seattle and Vancouver. I'm going to ignore Anchorage. Save your messages for later. We'll get to that in a minute. Cruises that go from Seattle are more convenient for Americans because there are more daily flights to Seattle from around the country, and prices are cheaper since the flight to Seattle is a domestic flight, where obviously a flight to Vancouver would be an international flight. Flights to Vancouver can be a little more difficult to get, especially direct flights, because there's far fewer of them from here in the United States. But you can always fly to Seattle and maybe take the train or rent a car in order to save money. Cruises from Seattle are round-trip sailings that begin and end in Seattle. Many cruises, but not all of them, but many cruises from Vancouver can be what's called open jaw sailings, which means they begin in Vancouver and end in Anchorage. And then a new sailing begins at Anchorage and goes back to Vancouver. You could book the next sailing to return to Vancouver and do a back-to-back, but that would require 2 weeks of time, which is something that not everybody can afford to do. Otherwise, you will have to either be flying to or from Anchorage on your way home or to the cruise. Be sure to consider where your cruise begins and ends the sailing before booking. And this is, I think, the most important place to start, because if you know you're not going to want to do an open jaw sailing, all of a sudden a number of options are off the table. Or if you start looking at airfare prices and you see the difference in prices, or maybe there isn't one, you can also an easier decision-making process. Next up are the ports you will visit. Where your ship goes in Alaska is also a major consideration, because there are a few different itineraries that you can choose from. Cruises from Seattle tend to visit the more common ports, if you will, such as Juneau and Skagway, whereas cruises that begin in Anchorage or Vancouver get to visit more remote ports. If you talk to people that have cruised Alaska a lot, they will tell you that by far the ports that are a little further away, the ones that typically you see on Vancouver sailings, tend to be the most impressive, the most exotic scenery, because of course the more remote ports offer a more authentic view of Alaska with more dynamic scenery and varied wildlife, a little less commercialization, if you will. Of course, Alaska is still stunning from any port you visit, and a cruise that only visits Juneau or Skagway is still an amazing cruise experience to explore for yourself. So I don't think you're shortchanging yourself by going on a cruise that only goes to Juneau or Skagway. But the question for you is there a particular place in Alaska that cruise ships go to that you absolutely positively must see and want to see? So if you're looking for the most stunning scenery, a cruise takes you further north is the way to go. If you're not sure, you're saying, man, I really don't know what to know, I'm simply looking to do an Alaska cruise, hey, take solace in the fact that even the most basic inside passage cruises are still really great sailings. Now, next, let's talk about ships and price, because at the end of the day, listen, money makes the world go round, including your cruise vacation plans, right? In 2021 and 2022, Royal Caribbean will have 4 cruise ships offering cruises to Alaska, and each of them has a compelling reason to choose either of them. You've got Ovation of the Seas, Quantum of the Seas, Radiance of the Seas, and Serenade of the Seas that will be sailing in both cruise seasons. Even if you're watching this video years beyond this, hello from the past, I can tell you that the ship you're sailing on, the logic behind what I'm about to tell you is going to still hold up, I think, for a lot of those other ships even in the future. So let's start off with the Quantum class, which are Quantum and Ovation of the Seas. These are the newest ships in the fleet, one of the newest ships in the fleet, I should say, and offer much more to see, eat, and do on board. They're also priced higher since you're sailing on one of Royal Caribbean's newer cruise ships. It's important to note that the Quantum class ships have 2 indoor pools, one for adults and one for people of all ages. And this is important because the other ships we're going to talk about only have an adults-only indoor area for swimming. And again, swimming is not the biggest deal in the world when it comes to Alaska cruises, but cruise ships are still a major component to your vacation. And for a lot of people, when you're on the cruise ship and you're not in port, it is important what the ship happens to offer for you. And if you're on the Quantum class ships, there's no shortage of amazing things to do. Historically speaking, cruise ships that used to go to Alaska were smaller and older, and they didn't offer as much. But of course, you're visiting places in Alaska, so the need for onboard amenities compared to, say, the Caribbean, as an example, was far less. However, in recent years, Royal Caribbean has said, okay, you don't have to compromise on the ship or the itinerary. You can have both of them. And with the Quantum class ships, you get exactly that. It's a big ship feel, plenty to do, plenty to eat, plenty to see, and you still get to visit some of these awesome places in Alaska. On the other hand, you've got the Radiance class ships, which are Radiance of the Seas and Serenade of the Seas. Now, these are smaller, relatively speaking, older ships that do not offer all the bells and whistles of the Quantum class, but are perfectly suited for a port-intensive itinerary like Alaska, where the destination is far more important than the ship you're sailing on. Moreover, Alaska's constantly changing weather makes outdoor activities on a cruise ship not nearly as important as in the Caribbean. So there's far less sea days, there's far less impetus to spend time outside, thus the ship may not matter nearly as much. Ultimately, I think the ship that you choose is more of a personal choice. I prefer A over B or B over A, but not because one is superior or objectively better. It kind of boils down to what you're looking for. Another consideration, though, is that Royal Caribbean offers land tours you can add on to Alaska cruises from Vancouver, where you can explore the interior of Alaska before or after your cruise. And for what it's worth, land tours are not available with cruises that go to Seattle. So if you're looking to visit Denali or some of the other amazing places in Alaska that, again, you can add on to your cruise vacation, this may also make your decision a little bit easier because you're going to be limiting yourself in your sense of choices. Generally speaking, the Quantum class ships will cost you more than a cruise on the Radiance class ships. The exact price obviously will vary from week to week, but you will have to weigh the price versus airfare costs. But I think the important thing to look at is don't look at this as a Caribbean cruise. Don't say, ooh, I'm going to be on this cruise ship for 7 nights or longer, and I need to have as many possible things to do. You're going to be busy exploring Alaska in port days in which you're in port for many more hours than you are in the Caribbean. And on top of that, when you're not in port, you may simply be wiped out from all the touring you're doing. So maybe dinner in bed is all you're going to need in between port stops. Again, different strokes for different folks, but don't look at this as a Caribbean type cruise. Look at this as the ship does certainly offer things for you to do, but it's not nearly as important. So which Alaska cruise should you choose? Ultimately, the decision on which ship and itinerary to pick comes down to, I think, prices, dates, and of course, ships. If you're cruising in Alaska for the first time, a lot of people will simply go for the Quantum class ships from Seattle for the convenient travel options to Seattle, ship accommodations, and the fact it's a round-trip cruise. You can't go wrong with this. This is not a bad decision to make, especially for first-timers. It's just, a good choice, and it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. However, if you want to see more authentic and exotic views of Alaska, an open-jaw sailing from Anchorage or Vancouver is what you want. You will see much more of the quote-unquote real, authentic Alaska on these itineraries. Ultimately, there really is no bad choice when it comes to a cruise to go to Alaska. You're going to find stunning views and amazing places to explore in any of the ports you visit. Understanding the differences between the ships and itineraries will ensure you make the right choice for your family. So there you have it. The most important ways to figure out how to choose the right Alaska cruise itinerary. I want to know in the comments, have you been to Alaska before? What is your recommendation for somebody who's going to Alaska for their first time? And if it is your first time and you're thinking about booking a cruise to Alaska, let me know in the comments what other questions do you have about going on an Alaska cruise. I'm telling you, you definitely want to do it as soon as possible because it is an amazing type of cruise. And while you're below our video, make sure you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on your notifications. That way, YouTube lets you know when we have a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.